Welcome to ProSears Conversations with Experts. I'm super excited to be here with someone who's become kind of a friend to me and to my partner Larry over 2024. Andres Marquez Lara is the founder of You Facilitate. He's an expert in building successful teams for scaling companies, and I'm really excited to have you here, Andres. Welcome.
No, thanks so much, Jeff. It's an honor to be here, and just glad that our journey has taken into this direction. It's unprecedented for us.
Awesome, of course. Same here. So, I think the good place for us to start is the framework for this conversation is how entrepreneurs and businesses can build teams that work together that help achieve goals that are greater than the individuals. And that's a lot of what you're doing with You Facilitate. Your career has given you a lot of experience and learnings, but I think it'd be helpful for the audience just to learn about you and how you got to found You Facilitate to where you're at now. So tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. So, what we do at YouFacility is that we're experts in cross-cultural collaboration. And as I say, we help people deal with the messy human stuff, the egos, the conflict, the miscommunication. These are the things that prevent collaboration. And so actually, I'm a therapist by training. I never imagined that being an expert in understanding the emotional realm, the messy human stuff, would actually be so valuable in the business world. But that's why I think it's been resonated, because every business out there, until AI takes over, will involve humans. And anytime you have humans, you're going to have people with conflict. You're going to have difference of opinions. And the emotional realm is oftentimes going to supersede our intellectual and logical reasons. And the key is to try to align these two elements, both the reason and the emotional. But people need help. They need outside counsel for that. And that's where we come in. And so again, for my own personal journey as a therapist, I'm from Venezuela originally, came to the States early on, lived in Boston, then Ohio, then North Carolina. But I was always interested in mental health. That was my background. And I studied psychology in college undergrad. I went back to Venezuela to continue deepening my psychological training in clinical community psychology. So again, no particular business acumen or business interest at the time. Came back, started working in DC in mental health. It wasn't until I had been working in mental health for a while and I had come across a type of theater. So part of my background is also I'm an improv actor. And so where I saw the combination of theater and mental health, that I was just blown away. And there was a person who was a business owner who had a consulting company where she brought actors to facilitate different activities. I was like, oh my God, hire me. Let me help you scale up. And so
Sure.
I reached out to her, got to know her, began acting with her group. But that's really where I began to feel that, okay, there's something I could do with my passion for mental health, for emotional realms, with improv to build something. And so basically that's back 2011. Like that's where the journey started for me and let me, again, not knowing anything about business, but just learn through the hard way by just trying things out and learning along the way. And 13 years later, I'm on my third venture now. Back then it was just me as solopreneur. We're now a company of 6 full-time staff, 140 consultants that we hire for different projects in 27 different countries.
Amazing. Congratulations. That's
Thank
awesome.
you.
How do you characterize You Facilitate's mission, and who do you aim to help, and how do you achieve those goals?
Yeah, I mean, our mission is, again, how do we help people? We work with purpose-driven groups. People are trying to do good in the world. We want to help them do good better, if you will. We want to help them do good by minimizing the messy human stuff getting in the way of them doing the work on the ground. So we're specialized working with large nonprofits, with foundations, with multilaterals like the World Bank or IDB, and some local government. Having said that, we work with, that's who we're targeting, but every business out there where you're encountering challenges, they could use somebody to facilitate activities, team building retreats, offsites, to really kind of help alignment. So that's kind of how we kind of came up with this idea that, people need this, especially the world, the way it is now, so chaotic, so complex. It's really, it's really not black and white. There's so much gray out there, and people have such strong opinions about the way it should be. Yep. That it makes it very hard for any do-gooders, anybody trying to make good in the world, to align to be able to do that.
That's so important. Alignment in all businesses, whether they're small or large
Yeah.
is so important. And sometimes it takes an outside perspective to really get everyone rowing in the same direction. And that's what we
Yes.
saw. We had our team offsite that was led by one of your facilitators, which was fantastic, and it was the process that really helped create that alignment. And so,
Yeah.
so important what you're doing, and really think can't speak highly enough about you and the organization. So,
Thank you.
on that note, the world is changing rapidly from the rise of remote work to AI. Where do you see the biggest opportunities for leadership in growing businesses these days? What are some things that are quick wins for founders, for executives at companies that they can implement
Hmm.
to see immediate returns, even on a small basis? Do you have any
Yeah.
tips and tricks that you recommend?
I mean, the what I'm going to say, I think, is applicable to in the past, but especially now in the future, right? I mean, it's AI is going to take over doing the tasks that computers can do, right? Analysis, data synthesis, that kind of stuff. And again, that's great. Like that's what they're there. But AI, at least not yet, will not be able to lead and manage people in that more soft skills leadership approach, right? And the number one thing you can do to become a better leader is actually to go to therapy or find a coach. Find a space where you can develop and really come to understand who are you as a person, what makes you tick. Because when you're at work, and especially as entrepreneurs, as founders, we know like there's so much pressure. We have so much pressure. Oftentimes we're putting a lot of our money on the line, our reputation, our families feels a lot of pressure. Like there's so much pressure, there's so much anxiety that if we're not aware of how we respond to that, we're going to be a less effective leader towards our teams, right?
Right.
Oftentimes if we're cranky, we're hungry, we're anxious, we're not our best selves. And in therapy, with coach, with self-reflection, the more you are aware of who you are, your triggers, your go-to activities, and your go-to behaviors, the more you can then recognize, like, oh, here I go again. I'm getting upset again. Oh, here I go. I'm being my neurotic self again. And like you can catch yourself. So I think that's one thing, to kind of really self-knowledge, lead yourself. That's the one thing.
Yeah.
The other thing, though, is to build that confident, that close team member, whether it's a co-founder, a team of allies, a board, a team of senior leaders that not only can complement your skill set, which is key in the technical level,
Mm.
but you can also rely on emotionally, and say, like they know when you're having a bad day, and they can call you out and say, Andres, you're being a bit neurotic today. Are you okay today? What's going on? And say, oh, you're right. This happened with my wife, or this happened with my kid.
Mhm.
Like having that psychological safety with close senior leaders, especially as you're scaling, especially as you're growing, is a must, because this world of entrepreneurship is so hard emotionally. You got to have those allies and that support structure in place. So those are the two things I would say. Any business out there, especially in the future work with AI, that's even going to get more complex out there, we need to go inward. I would say that's, I think, the one tagline I would say.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. And use the key word there, pressure. Entrepreneurs, executives are under pressure. And
Yes.
it seems that going to therapy, having a coach, or having some sort of outlet is almost like a release valve for that
Yeah.
pressure to help alleviate you from some of the stress, or help at least identify how to channel that.
and,
So
and
that's a
and we
great
need
point.
that. I mean, the world is more chaotic than ever.
Mhm.
It's just going to continue to go that route. There are two terms that actually I speak about in my book, which we'll talk about later on. But there's a term called VUCA, which stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And
Mhm.
it's a term that was coined after the fall of the Berlin Wall to describe the trend of the world after the Soviet Union collapse. It was going to become more volatile, more uncertain, more complex, and more ambiguous. That was 1989, though. It's been a while. And there's actually more recently a new term that came out called Bani, which is basically, it's like, how does it feel to be in this like hyper VUCA world? And this author said it actually is a Bani world. It stands for brittle, anxious, nonlinear, and incomprehensible. And so this world that we live in feels brittle. We're waiting for the next shoe to drop. Like, what's going to be the next war, the next crisis, the next spill, or whatever it is. We're constantly anxious, expecting something to happen. Things, are non-linear. One thing that, the supply chain with COVID just have completely stopped because of that. It showed us these things that are non-linear, right? Climate change. We can do everything we can in our power within the next few years to reduce the pollution, and it'll take 50 years for the climate atmosphere to do that. So the nonlinearity of it is pretty outstanding, and it's incomprehensible. The things that are happening are really hard to understand.
Yeah.
So in this crazy context, there is so much pressure, and there's a narrative on top of that, Jeff, that we have to succeed. We always have to have the huggy puck stick. It always has to go up.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's not compatible with life.
Right. That's it's definitely the exception, not the rule, right?
Well, the only thing that grows consistently, exponentially in nature is cancer cells.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
I mean, I don't quote me scientifically, but cancer is like the only cell in our bodies that grows and doesn't stop, because our bodies actually are constantly like growing, but things are being recycled and reused and dying. But cancer is actually just pure growth.
Wow. Interesting. I did not know that. Well, thanks for that. Those are two terms that I didn't know, but they're super important for modern day entrepreneurs to be aware of. How are you seeing this this body acronym manifest itself in today's businesses? How is it? What are examples of how that's playing out within organizations that you're working with, that entrepreneurs and leaders who are watching this can help identify, hey, those are risks that I should that Andres was talking about, and I should probably take action. What are those indicators?
I mean, a couple examples, like how many of us listening to this podcast had some sort of strategic plan in the, Q1 2020, February 2020, we all had plans for the year and we had goals and desires. And then March comes and we shut down, and what happened to those strategies and plans? Disappear.
Yeah.
Last March, ChatGPT comes out roaring. And now a year later, it's just crazy. The amount of Sora just came out a few weeks ago, producing text to video. It's exponential, right. The amount of change is happening. Mm-hmm. So I think, these are just concrete examples of VUCA and BANI in our world. Yeah. Now, what can leaders and founders, entrepreneurs do to prepare for that is first acknowledge you cannot predict the future. You can't, there are trends, and you can kind of maybe, but don't bet the house on these trends, because the world is incomprehensible and nonlinear. The best thing you can do is to assume a prototyping mindset, to kind of have a growth mindset where you're testing things out. You're taking small bets, seeing how they respond in the market, in the world, and learning from that. Because that way you don't have to know in advance. You just have to take educated guesses that are small, see how they pan out, and then based on that, pivot and adapt. So strategies nowadays should not be a 5-year major strategic plan, but rather have, okay, here's our strategy, but what are some strategic bets that we have that will inform how we adapt into the future?
Yeah. That's a good point. So kind of tiptoe a little bit, test the hypothesis, and walk before you run when it comes to making large changes within your organization. Did I hear that right?
Yes. And the other piece is, as you discover the things that do work and you're able to grow and mature and scale, always have that kind of child's mindset, learning's mind, they're always learning. Because the thing that can happen is, we then get seduced in thinking, oh, we got this. I know this. There's a pattern. And then something happens. I mean, think of, this is a bit dated, but, Kodak and the photography industry. Before digital cameras came out, they just got so secured into their product, the way the world was. And when you have these huge innovations that just change the world, major industries just die. I mean, think of Netflix and Blockbuster again. When these companies, as they grow and scale, begin to believe their own hypotheses. They think, oh, this is the way the world is. And then boom, you get this breakthrough innovation. And if you're not thinking constantly, what can I learn? Mm-hmm. You're not going to do well.
Yeah, that's really, really hard to do though, right? It's easier to say. I find myself often, just digging my heels in to things that I thought were true, and take a deep breath, and 24 hours later realizing, hey, I should have taken a different approach to that situation and approach the new ideas with the learning mindset. So, I'm a perfect case study, a perfect example of the people you're talking about, and I definitely need to do better. How do you coach people to take that approach,
Yeah. Well,
in these situations?
I mean, and this goes back to my previous answer. Like the number one thing you can do is like, let's go to therapy, find a coach, like
Yeah.
build that muscle. Going to therapy is like building, it's like going to a gym. If you go work out, you probably go to the gym or run, 3, 5 times a week.
Mhm.
We're trying to build our physical health, which is great.
Yeah.
But what do we do for our emotional health? Where do
Mhm.
we get to work out our emotional muscles to practice that ability to reflect, to pivot quickly, to adapt to all these things?
Yep.
So, I mean, these are things, again, that it's not a one-off thing you're going to learn. Again, it's like a muscle. It'd be the same saying, oh, I'm going to go to the gym and do one set of curls and I'm expecting to have, 12-inch arms. Like, no, like you got to go for a long time, consistently work on your diet for that to happen. It's the same kind of thing for our behavior and emotions. You need to put in the work. You have to create an intentional space to reflect, to do hard work because it doesn't feel comfortable. You're questioning a lot of the assumptions that make you you. Who the heck wants to unpack, to really question why they think the way they do? Who wants to unpack and include the possibility that perhaps the way you thought the world was is wrong? Nobody wants to do that, right? But my point is, leaders, founders, entrepreneurs, if you want to lead and kind of have that cutting edge advantage, you have to do the hard work to know yourself so you can respond better to the complexity of the world.
Yeah, that's a great point. Well said. So we focused a lot of this conversation so far on leaders. Let's talk a little bit more about the role players in organizations. We hear a lot about terms of engagement is at all-time low
Yeah.
within companies. We hear the term quiet quitting. How can leaders improve engagement and get buy-in from people that are managing day to day?
Yeah. I mean, I think the Gallup stat is like, in the US, like 25% or 20% of the employees are engaged, so it's like, it's common that people are not engaged at the workplace, right? I mean, I think to me, this comes back to culture, right? It's like, how do you build a workplace culture that supports people in feeling like they belong, like they want? When you feel included, like you belong, you want to be there. You want to be engaged. When work doesn't feel like work, how many of us can say that, right? Not many people, right? But how do you make things belong? You help shape them. You help create them. So one of the things that, and I think this is easier in smaller organizations than larger. If you have a 10,000 employee company, it's a bit harder than if you have like a 10, 20 people team, right? But what kind of questions or opportunities can you create for your staff where they can create genuine input and then as leaders, listen to them and take action on that? How can you make it more inclusive where they feel like they're helping shape the activities of what's happening? Now, one thing that people tend to underutilize and underappreciate are actually meetings. Anytime you meet with your team, that's the place where culture gets built, reinforced, or canceled, right? If in that meeting somebody speaks out of turn to give a feedback and the leader says, don't speak out of turn, the culture you're building is, okay, only people that raise their hand at any point can talk. And maybe that's the culture you want to create. That's fine. But sometimes you have to be in, how do we intentionally create the culture that we want to create? It's all about intention. And so I think for employee engagement is, how do we intentionally create spaces for employees to bring who they are into the workspace, to be seen, to feel heard, etc. It's not enough to give once a month recognition, employee of the month, or go for a happy hour once a month. Like those are nice, but it's more meaningful. Like Dan Pink talks about what motivates people are purpose, autonomy, and mastery. So how are we as leaders of organizations supporting people to feel connected to their purpose? They chose to work with your company for a reason. How is that tied to their overall purpose? How are you giving them autonomy? Obviously, you can't, micromanaging. No one wants a micromanager. So, but at the same time, you have to have a quality assurance, QA, QI. So how do you then put some constraints to ensure that they can move freely within these parameters, but they can build that autonomy? And mastery, how can you ensure that the people, that your skill sets, that what you went to school for, what you trained for, ideal? I mean, in theory, you want those things. You wanted to learn those things. So how can you give room for that, right? So these are the three pillars, if you will, that Dan Pink talks about in his book called Drive, that I think as leaders, again, each of these allows us to think about intentionally, how do we do each of these three things?
Wow, Really, really well said. The follow up question I have for you is so much what we hear about today is people trying to rid their calendar of meetings.
Yeah.
But what I heard was that meetings are important. How do
Yes.
you how do you work with your clients and how do you coach people to bring in meetings in the right way? And
Yeah.
how do they run meetings in a way that has that intentionality?
I mean, Harvard Business Review has a great decision tree of what should be a meeting and what should not be a meeting. So the thing is, I think a lot of people have meetings, and there's a study that's done by, you've probably heard of Doodles,
Hmm.
to kind of help align schedules.
Yep.
They have something called State of Meeting Report, where they actually calculated that, and this is like pre-pandemic, like 2019, that I think it was like $500 billion of wasted productivity in meetings in the US and UK alone, something like that. It's like, because if you think about it, the hourly rate of all the employees, 10 people meeting in 1 hour, and it's a wasted meeting, people rolling their eyes. I mean, what was that? Maybe, $20,000. And that happening multiple times a day, several times, it's just ridiculous. So not all, so the problem is people are creating meetings that should not be meetings. And the meetings that they are creating are poorly facilitated, right? To be able to kind of have the meetings I'm talking about, you have to come in with an intention. What are we trying to accomplish here? And it's not just the agenda, but what's this for? And based on that, who should be in the meeting? Because the other thing is we also invite 10 people and where there should only be 3 people, right? And the other 7 people should be notified via an updated email or the minutes or asynchronously. So I think as people, we need leaders, entrepreneurs, founders need to be more intentional.
Hmm.
What meetings, what meetings should we have? What are they for? Who should be there? And then once they're there, not all meetings are the same.
Hmm.
One meeting might be a download where I'm, as a founder, going to be telling people, here's an update from the board, or here's an update from a conference I went to.
Yep.
And the expectation is that, hey, I'll share for 20 minutes and then people can just ask questions at the end.
Yep.
That's a very different meeting than saying a project update status where everyone perhaps has different, is doing different things and everyone has to contribute.
Yep.
There's another resource which we can share later on called Taxonomy of Meetings by a group called Lucid Meetings.
Yep.
And they basically say, again, meetings are different. Some meetings require different types of facilitation, different agendas. So obviously this is context dependent, of course. Your company might do different than mine. But the idea is, as leaders, let's think about the intent. Let's think about the how.
Right. That's great. Really, really important. Intention and making sure that you're not wasting people's time. You're creating value for everyone, not just for
Yeah.
the business.
Yep. And the thing is, sometimes you might not know in advance of that. You might say, oh, I want to have this meeting, but then how are you including in the feedback of participants? How are you creating a culture where your staff can say, Jeff, that really sucked. Maybe not so directly, but saying, Jeff, I don't think we got the best value out of that meeting. How we thought about doing it this way. And then as leaders, are we humble enough to say, you know what? Okay, what would you suggest? What should we do differently? And then experimenting. Again, I think it goes back to having that experimental mentality where you're testing things out and what works for you, and then constantly having that mentality.
Yeah, that's a great point. The feedback trigger is an important word that we all either love or we love to hate. Accountability.
Yeah.
You talk a lot about accountability and how do you create an environment of accountability and a culture of accountability in growing businesses?
I mean, I think it starts with trust. One of the frameworks that we like to use is the Patrick Lencioni framework. There's a book called The Five Dysfunctions of a Team. And he has this pyramid where he talks about, all great teams after he interviewed hundreds of, CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, basically said, you got to have trust as a team so you can have conflict. And if you can have a healthy conflict, you can then have accountability because we went through it together. And if we can have accountability, then we can kind of come together and have commitment and get the results. I'm paraphrasing a bit here, but I do know that the bottom rung is trust, which leads to conflict, and then accountability is on top of that. Yep. To hold each other accountable, we got to have trust, and we have to go through something together, which he calls conflict, but genuine conflict, the conflict of ideas, not people, not personalities. Not, it's like think about, like, I don't know if you ever, like, whenever you have like a really intense conversation with somebody and you're able to make it through, right? You land at a place where you both feel comfortable.
Yep.
You went through something together. You're sure as hell gonna keep each other committed to that, because undoing that is like, oh my God, more work. I have to go back to all that stuff. Yep. Like you're investing in the relationship to do that. Yep. So how do you hold people accountable? It's going back to trust. You have to build trust with people in your teams. You have to create a culture of psychological safety where people can feel comfortable being vulnerable, being in conflict, giving you feedback.
Yep.
The worst thing you can do is create artificial harmony, which is essentially where you say, yeah, we're okay, no problem. But then I go behind your back and I go in the hallway and talk to my colleagues or on the Slack channel and talk trash saying, you know, what's Jeff talking about? He doesn't get it. And so that's not going to help anybody, because
Right.
I won't hold you accountable because I don't have the trust to tell you that in the moment. And obviously we're talking in a podcast is very kind of, in real situations, real life, there's so many variables, culture, where people like, what's their country of origin, what industry they're coming from, how new. We're living in a time where we have 5 generations of the workplace, right? From Gen Z to boomers.
Mm-hmm.
And, baby boomers and Gen Z are very different in how they handle conflict.
Yep.
So these are things that leaders have to be mindful of and basically think through. And again, it's not a cookie cutter approach. We have to think
Yep.
through, and it's going back to leading yourselves. It's
Yep.
tied to how do we as leaders deal with our own conflict? How do we feel comfortable with conflict in our workplace?
That's right. Yeah. And, so much of what we do with our clients and working in reviewing their financials is honestly brings up a lot of conflict. We use the phrase "don't shoot the messenger" often,
Yep.
but we have to hold them accountable to their goals, to their performance last year, to performance year to date, and things that they told us they wanted to do.
Yeah.
And holding themselves accountable to themselves. Often people don't want to take ownership of the decisions that they made.
Nope.
They want to deflect blame, and that comes with they'll call people out. How should people handle those types of situations where they need to have difficult conversations with people, whether you call it calling out or whatever you want to say, but we need to have hard conversations to hold people accountable.
Yeah, and actually, I'm pulling up here. I was at a conference last month where I came across. I met for the first time this amazing professor. Her name is Dr. Loretta J. Ross. And she actually has a book coming up called Calling In, Creating Change Without Cancel Culture. And she has this whole framework about, instead of calling people out, we got to call them in. The premise is that calling people out essentially is a virtue signal. You don't know this, let me call you out. And there's this really, who likes being called out? It's shaming. It's a way to shame people in front of others to kind of do that. If anything, if you want to call somebody out or hold them accountable, ideally do it in a one-on-one setting. There's no need to kind of do it in a public setting unless you want to shame them publicly, which that makes you question, like, why? What's the intent there, right? And that's not going to help long-term relationships or trust. Calling in is about being curious, really trying to understand the other person's perspective, their frame of mind.
Yeah.
Now, keep in mind, again, like this is hard in the business world, because we're moving so fast. Yeah. We're moving so quickly that am I going to slow down to talk to you, to really understand and spend half an hour with my employee trying to understand? So we kind of minimize that and just say, you know what, forget that. It is what it is. Go, we got to move on. And so it's easier short term to call someone out than it is to call them in.
Right.
However, long-term and sustainability wise, it pays, I would say tenfold, to spend the time and energy building a culture of calling people in, as Dr. Ross would say, of being curious, of understanding their perspective when it comes to what's happening and how they see it differently. She sees, obviously, her book's more about social activism and kind of the cancel culture in general, but I think there are some parallels there that can apply to, the conversation we're having.
Yeah, of course. So much of what we do when we're working with our clients is helping them, asking those curious questions, asking those open-ended questions, to allow them to hold themselves accountable to the decisions, but in a way that's safe and that's healthy, that allows them to grow. So, hey, why did you decide to sponsor that conference that may or may not have a tie to your revenue? Why did you decide to hire that person that doesn't have direct experience? What were you thinking? What was the thesis then, and how does it apply now? There's a lot of things that asking those open-ended questions can create that time and that space to hold people accountable to themselves, as opposed to coming down on people. So,
and I would say, Jeff, that you're more likely to, I'm sure in your situation, the clients you work with the best are the ones that trust you, right? Because those questions are heard differently if I perceive them to be from a place of trust
That's
and
right.
care than judgment. Because
100%.
I'm much more likely to, what would Jeff's gonna kill me when I tell him like I did. Like you build that relationship where I trust for you to have my best interest at heart,
That's right.
right? And so that's going to support the accountability piece. But again, it goes back to trust.
That's right. Yeah. So many times we often talk to clients or potential clients about what we do, and we use the term financial therapy
Yeah.
because we use the numbers to hold that accountability, but we create that space to let people be open and honest about their hopes, their fears, and their goals, and they have a partner to help them achieve that goal. And so I see a lot of parallels in between everything you've been talking about and what we do with our clients on a regular basis.
Definitely.
Let's have one more point. I love that we're running out of time, but I'd love to have one more just kind of Andresism on trust. What are some things that people can do to improve the trust in
Yeah.
their organizations? We talked about meetings and culture, but it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
What do you recommend? What are some tactics that people can take immediately?
Yeah, and so this is going to come. It's not an Andersism. I'm just repeating back what I learned a few months ago from a friend of ours. So Shane Howell, a facilitator from Barbados, was helping us do a training with a client, and we were doing a trust section, right? And he told us actually about this framework that is from a group called, I think, Trustology. And the whole framework is, this group study essentially that there are three pillars to build trust, right? There's the expertise column, there's the consistency column, and the positive feeling column, if you will, positive relationships. And he says, all things being equal, if you're able to show your expertise, right? Let's say in your case, Jeff, you go to a client and you're selling accounting finance services, but you talk in a way that makes them question your expertise. I'm not going to trust you. Boom. So
Right.
even if you're really nice and even if you show up on time and you're consistent, I won't trust you on that, right? But let's say you show the expertise really well, but you're inconsistent. You told me you're going to show up one time and you didn't show up, and then you kind of cancel again. Boom, that trust is going to go down.
Yeah.
Even if you're really nice in that call.
Yeah.
Let's say you show up on time, you show your expertise, but you're just a bit rude, or you're having an off day, or something happened where you're just not your charming self, right? So that trust factor goes down. So you need all three at a baseline to establish trust.
Yeah.
But if all three are equal, the one that will have more impact than all the other three is positive behaviors, positive relationships. So you don't need to be the most thought out expert to build trust. You just have enough level of expertise. You have to be consistent enough. But the nicer, the kinder you are, the more trust you'll be able to build. So again, there's just, it's about really kind of being human, allowing people for yourself to be human, allow others to be human, while also honoring the fact that we're experts and we have to be consistent, right? So I think these are some of the things from this framework that, again, I highly recommend. And again, a lot of the stuff I'm sharing in this podcast episode, Jeff, are actually all part in this book I wrote last year with ChatGPT, which we'll share a link with your listeners, where you can just download for free, and you'll be able to see a lot of these different frameworks in there, and just an easy way to just kind of browse and jump around.
Yeah. Tell us the name of the book and where people can find it.
Yeah, it's called Facilitating Leadership, a quick and easy guide to leading with brain, heart, and soul. And basically, we'll put the link, but if you go to youfacilitate.com, that's you, the letter U, and the word facilitate.com, you'll see a list for resources, and you can just download there, and we'll include the link in the here as well.
Amazing. Well, congratulations on writing a book. You're an author.
Thank you.
Among being an expert in culture and company and leadership. And Andres, I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your knowledge with us. Where can people find you if they're interested in learning more about you or You Facilitate?
Sure. So youfacilitate.com is probably kind of where we have our main point of contact. I'm also on LinkedIn. If you want to find me on LinkedIn, Andres Marquez Lara, but it's probably youfacilitate.com is probably easier than spelling out my name on LinkedIn.
Sure. No worries. Well, we'll tag you on this when we post it to social media.
Awesome.
Any parting words of recommendation or optimism that you'd like to share with the viewers of the podcast?
Well, first, just a word of gratitude. Thank you, Jeff, for including me and inviting me to participate in this podcast. I think there's so much that's happening in the world, and just allowing me to kind of share some of these small kind of things that I've learned that have helped me. I really appreciate. But the last thing I would say is, I think given how hard the world is, and it is hard, is like, let's allow ourselves to have some grace with ourselves and each other. Like, we don't stop being humans when we clock at 9 in the morning. We don't stop being humans, like when we kind of go through the office door, when we jump into a Zoom call. Like, stuff's hard. What's happening in the world, in Ukraine, in Gaza, politics in the US, maybe things are happening at home. 1 in 4 people have mental illness, the levels of addiction, like the economy, inflation, you name it, turn on the news. And it's not surprising that it's very hard. So in that context, let's be soft with ourselves. Let's have some grace. We can still do work and we still can deliver, but we're here to live a life, not to work to death, right?
Amazing. Well said. I feel so much better after this conversation.
Likewise.
You're just truly an expert, and I truly appreciate you doing this. Everyone, please reach out to Andres if you need anyone to, if you're looking for that coach, if you're looking for that expert for your business. He has a network of experts that can truly make a difference in your business. And follow him on LinkedIn. He's sharing insights and recommendations all the time. So Andres, thanks so much for being here, and look forward to talking to you soon.
Thanks so much, Jeff. You're well.